This week, we remember a country music legend. It has been 20 years since Johnny Cash died, but a downtown attraction is giving fans access to the star.
Office, 1954. A flatbed truck parked outside a drugstore on Lamar Avenue. 300 people, mostly teenage girls, screaming at a 19-year-old kid with one single to his name. Johnny Cash stood in that crowd, watching. He had no idea this moment would change the rest of his life. Cash was 22, recently married, and freshly signed to Sun Records. The kid on that flatbed was younger, hungry, and about to shake the entire world. After that drugstore performance, the young singer did something unexpected. He invited Johnny and his wife Vivian to his next show at the Eagle's Nest, an adult club in Memphis. Cash would remember every detail of that July night for the rest of his life. The venue was nearly empty. Maybe 15 people showed up, but that young performer performed like he was playing to 50,000. Cash sat there completely transfixed. Years later, he would write that what really struck him was something most people never noticed. The kid could play guitar, really play. Cash recalled that he was a fabulous rhythm player, that he would start into That's All Right Mama with his own guitar alone, and you simply did not want to hear anything else. It's a detail that got buried under everything that came later. After leaving Sun Records, Cash never heard that raw guitar work on his recordings again. The producers had other plans. But here's what almost nobody talks about. While the world was falling in love with this young star's voice, he was busy promoting someone else. He had just become friends with Johnny Cash, and he could not stop playing Cash's music everywhere he went. Small cafes across the South, tour buses, anywhere with a jukebox. June Carter had no idea who Johnny Cash was in the mid-50s. She was touring as part of the Carter sisters, and one day she heard this rising star trying to tune his guitar and sing Cry, Cry, Cry. She admitted she had never heard of the man. He looked at her like she had just said she had never heard of the sun. Oh, you'll know Cash. The whole world will know Johnny Cash. He's a friend of mine. Think about that. A man on the verge of becoming the biggest star on the planet spent his time championing another artist, not just in private, but actively introducing him to people, playing his records, building him up out of nothing but genuine belief. And June, she would eventually become Johnny's wife, the love of his life. That rising star introduced them through music, through constant promotion, through unwavering faith in his friend's talent. The whole tour, he played Johnny Cash on every jukebox they passed. He would tell June, that's what drives the crowd wild. Cash doesn't have to move a muscle. He just sings and stands there. There was real admiration in those words. No jealousy, no rivalry, just one artist recognizing something extraordinary in another. December 4th, 1956. Sun Records Studio. Carl Perkins was recording. Jerry Lee Lewis was on piano. Then the young star walked in with his girlfriend, just stopping by to say hello. What happened next became legend. They started playing gospel songs, Bill Monroe tunes, a pure, unfiltered music with no agenda except the joy of being alive and making sound together. Johnny Cash was there from the very beginning. He would later have to correct the record because some accounts left him out entirely or minimized his presence. He wrote that he was there. He was the first to arrive and the last to leave. His voice is on the tape, though you have to listen carefully. He was farthest from the microphone, singing higher than usual to match his friend's key. But he was there. They called it the $1 Million Quartet Session. 4 men who were reshaping American music, caught in a single moment of pure creation. No egos, no handlers, just friends making music in a small room in Memphis. But something else was happening in that room that day, something Cash would only fully understand decades later. What he was watching his friend become something larger than life, and he was beginning to sense what that would eventually cost, not just the man himself, but everyone around him. The friendship they were building in those Sun Records days had an expiration date neither of them could see coming. Johnny watched from the wings. Every single show, he never missed the chance. None of them did. Because this performer was not just talented, he was magnetic in a way that defied any explanation. The charisma was not something you could learn or manufacture. You either had it or you did not. And he had it in a way no one else ever quite matched. Years later, Cash would say, the best performer probably was Elvis Presley. He said he did not think anybody could touch him. This was not casual praise. Johnny had seen everyone. He had shared stages with legends and watched countless artists work their craft across decades. But Elvis operated on a completely different frequency. The way he connected with an audience was beyond technique or practice. It was pure instinct, raw and untamed. In 1959, they toured together. Johnny would open his set with a playful impression, swiveling his hips and belting out Heartbreak Hotel. The crowd would laugh and cheer. Then Elvis would take the stage and return the favor, doing his own version of The Man in Black. It was warm, affectionate, the kind of thing only genuine friends could pull off without it ever feeling like competition. But underneath the laughter and the mutual respect, something was quietly shifting. Elvis had been 19 when they first met. A kid who loved cheeseburgers, chased after girls, and adored his mother. Not necessarily in that order. More like his mother first, then everything else. He was full of joy, obsessed with his music, lit up by gospel songs in a way that was completely genuine. Johnny loved that version of him, the raw, hungry version, the one playing his own guitar with a rhythm that made you forget anyone else existed. After Sun Records, something changed. The guitar disappeared from his recordings. The productions got bigger, glossier, more controlled. It sold millions. It made him the biggest star on earth. But it was not the same. Johnny noticed. He did not say much publicly, but he noticed. Their paths were simply diverging. Elvis went to Hollywood, made films, recorded polished hits under careful management. Johnny stayed on the road, playing prisons in small towns, building a different kind of legacy. They were never as close as people assumed. Different ages, different priorities, different lives. And then Elvis started closing his world. You could see it happening if you paid close attention. The walls going up around Graceland, literally and figuratively. The inner circle getting smaller, more protective, more guarded. Old friends would travel to see him and get turned away at the gate. It was devastating for them, humiliating even. Johnny took the hint without being told. He did not try to push his way through. He would later write that he was grateful he had not, because watching those rejections happen to others, seeing the hurt and embarrassment on their faces, that would have been worse than the distance itself. It was a choice that revealed exactly who Johnny Cash was. Some people would have used their connection, would have forced their way past security or gone to the press with stories about being shut out. Johnny simply stepped back. If his friend needed to retreat from the world, then that was what he needed. Sometimes friendship means knowing when to leave someone alone. They never performed together again after the 50s. Two parallel tracks had briefly intersected, then gradually moved apart. But there is something his son, John Carter, would reveal much later, a detail that adds an entirely different layer to everything. Johnny carried a quiet jealousy for years, not simply of the fame or the success, but of something far more personal. June Carter had a certain sparkle in her eyes whenever that name came up, a light that Johnny noticed, and that their son would remember clearly decades later. June would say openly that Johnny had always carried that feeling. She once admitted she had wondered what her life might have looked like had things gone differently. The man who had introduced them through music, who had played Johnny's songs on every jukebox across the South, who had championed him before the world knew his name, had also left behind a shadow that would quietly linger inside Johnny's marriage for years. That is the nature of friendship at that level. Nothing ever stays simple. Then, on August 16, 1977, the news arrived like a shockwave. Elvis Presley was gone at 42. Johnny heard it the way most of the world did, through television reports and frantic phone calls. For Johnny, it was not simply the loss of a cultural icon, and it was the end of something that had begun in Memphis 23 years earlier, when two young men with enormous dreams stood in the same room at Sun Records. Both hungry, both absolutely convinced they could change music forever. He did not rush to speak publicly. That was never his way. While others scrambled for interviews and shared their memories and their theories, Johnny stayed quiet, grieving privately, processing in the way that people do when a loss is genuinely complicated. But when he did speak, his words were measured and protective. He remembered his friend as he truly was, not as the caricature the media had assembled in those final years. Johnny spoke about how sensitive he had been, how easily hurt by stories and rumors circulating about him, how much the gossip had affected him beneath the surface. It was a quiet defense because Johnny understood better than most what it felt like to be misunderstood, to have your struggles broadcast and picked apart by people who had never come close to walking in your shoes. That Christmas, Johnny organized something that carried real meaning. His television special brought together what remained of the old Sun Records crew: Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison. They performed a gospel song in honor of their fallen friend. No grand spectacle, no speeches. Just four men who had been there at the very beginning, standing together to remember the one who had not made it through. The performance carried a weight that no words could match. These were the survivors, the ones who had navigated the madness of fame with varying degrees of damage, gathering one more time for the one who had been swallowed by it. Years passed. Johnny kept making music, kept touring, kept finding new ways to reinvent himself in ways his old friend never got the chance to. The American recordings era brought him an extraordinary comeback in the 90s, introducing him to a generation that had not yet been born when he and Elvis stood together in that Memphis studio. He recorded until the very end, right up to his own passing in 2003. His son would later reflect on how differently the two legacies had unfolded. One carried on and kept evolving until his final breath. The other became frozen in time, captured permanently inside the image the world had demanded he maintain. But Johnny never forgot where it all started. In interviews, even decades later, he returned to those early memories. Here in the Eagles Nest show with 15 people in the crowd. The rhythm guitar playing that disappeared from the records. The kid who loved cheeseburgers and his mother above everything else. That was the version of his friend Johnny held on to. Not the sequined jumpsuit, not the final difficult years. the raw talent who sat down at a piano in December 1956 and sang